legacy began nearly 60 years ago, yet remains to be unforgettable. What started from a night of 4 teens in the woods would soon spark into the world's most beloved and feared entity. Tonight, we meet the Mothman.
Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your choosing our theater. To make this experience more enjoyable for everyone, we hope you'll refrain from talking during the show. Enjoy the movie. Thank you.
November 15th, 1966. Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallet were driving near McClintock Wildlife Management, a former World War II munitions factory. Referred to as the TNT area, the factory was recommissioned into being a wildlife management area. However, the area does still contain explosives, obviously secured. Well, sort of. Although unknown if Mothman was searching for TNT or simply taking in the view, the group of 4 clearly interrupted his night out. Described as a slender, muscular man who stood roughly 7 feet tall, the Mothman also had white wings and glowing red eyes, but his face was defined as indiscernible by the Mallets. Why? Well, because of his ability to hypnotize you with his eyes, of course. Duh. The witnesses drove off, with the Mothman following close behind them. At first, he merely ran towards them, clumsily stumbling and awkwardly moving his legs forward. But soon, the 4 watched as Mothman ascended into the air, described as if it were rising upwards, like a helicopter.
This helicopter is taking off!
Amazed, or disturbed, at the speed of this entity, the driver had the car reaching over 100 miles per hour, with no sight of losing this creature. But just as they were close to breaching Point Pleasant city limits, the Mothman abandoned the chase and flew off into the darkness. The 2 couples argued on whether or not they should tell someone about this, before finally coming forward to Deputy Halstead. Knowing that the 4 individuals held no previous record of causing commotion or stirring up trouble, Halstead decided to investigate. The 2 couples stayed in the deputy's vehicle while he went to inspect the area, commenting that the entire time, his radio had begun receiving strange disturbances, but no moth-like creature was to be spotted. Their bizarre encounter with the Man of the Moth was published to the press, and just 24 hours after their experience, Point Pleasant Register would hit the news.
The hunter didn't understand when the dark stranger said he was spreading this new religion.
Within 48 hours, the story of this man-sized bird creature something would reach national press. The following days were filled with gasps across North America, and, oddly, sighs of relief, as the nation would discover that there are others who can finally relate with their own experiences. 2 firemen reported seeing this man-shaped moth one night, but mentally crossed it off as, quote-unquote, just a large bird with red eyes. Now, yes, there are birds who have red eyes, such as the wood duck, the western grebe, or this parakeet that I just photoshopped. But a bird with red eyes who also is 7 feet tall and muscular, that's less possible. Kenneth Duncan reported that he and a few other men were out one day digging a grave when he saw something that, quote-unquote, looked like a brown man bust past. It was gliding through the trees and was in sight for maybe about a minute. Unfortunately, none of the other men witnessed this. However, another article states the complete opposite, claiming that all of the men had seen this creature, even quoting, "If I had seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything, but there were 4 of us who saw it." So, someone's lying. And then there's the Marcella Bennett's encounter, the story that happened exactly 24 hours after Mothman was spotted, referred to as the second sighting. On November 16th, 1966, rumors circulated that several armed local residents combed the area around the TNT plant for signs of Mothman. Then, at about 9 p.m., Marcella Bennett was among peers, carrying her infant daughter Tina, as everyone was beginning to leave the Ralph Thomas family residence. Returning to their cars, both Marcella and the Wamsley couple bared witness to a figure rising from behind a parked vehicle. Quickly, it ascended onto the Thomases' porch and then the roof. It rose up slowly from the ground, a big gray thing, bigger than a man, with terrible glowing red eyes, reported Marcella Bennett. Marcella, so panic-stricken and filled with fear, had stumbled back, accidentally dropping young Tina onto the ground, before tripping and falling onto her. As this figure began to spread its wings, Raymond Wamsley snatched up Tina and pushed for everyone to head inside the Thomas residence. The unknown bird-like animal vanished by the time the police arrived.
It is a shapeshifter, but I think its original form is a 7-foot-tall creature with wings that span 6 feet or so. It has a goblin-like face and ears with bat-like wings, but way more flexible. It's real dark brown, almost black in color. It has red eyes that almost glow in the dark. It has claw-like feet and very long fingers and arms. Arms are not connected to the wings. They are separate. Wings are more like on its back like a bird's. Has a long tail and is pointed at the end. It's extremely fast in this form.
The witness describes in detail what Mothman looks and acts like, saying that she's been stalked by Mothman for over 47 years now.
It has been inside several homes we have lived in. It hates dogs. It perches up high to avoid being seen. It hides in the shadows, like it's stalking you, similar to a feline. It has an odor almost like a musty or moss-like scent. Once you smell it, you'll never forget it. It's mean in nature and likes to show it's in control. No matter the form, it also has a loud screeching sound. It's hard to explain. No, I do not have a photo of it, and I cannot explain why my family has seen it so many times. I have no answers, but I know it's real.
47 years of being stalked to the point that you can smell it, all without one single photograph. And as if stalking wasn't bad enough, Newell Partridge claimed that this moth male specimen is to blame for the disappearance of his German Shepherd dog, Bandit, one which Newell had to emphasize cost him $350, which, in today's standard, is approximately $3,400. So, remember everyone, adopt, don't shop. Newell also stated that he saw this man thing in a meadow by his home, just 50 minutes before the Point Pleasant story. Take it as you will, but to me, it just sounds like Newell was desperate to stay in the headlines. However, Newell and the other witnesses shared similar details in their individual stories. A lanky figure with red eyes that are similar to bike reflectors, physically muscular with large wings. Yet, when hearing these tales of cryptid beings passing through the press, Sheriff Johnson declared his own opinion in the paper. While not discounting the stories I was told, I feel what was seen was nothing more than a freak shite poke. Wildlife biologist Robert L. Smith told reporters that the descriptions and sightings resemble the sandhill crane, a large American crane almost as tall as a man, with a 7-foot wingspan, featuring circles of reddish coloring around the eyes. This almost matches the stature, and the eyes share the same color. Problem is, not only had sandhill cranes migrated south by this point, although Robert believed that a crane might have wandered away from others, but what crane or heron could stay up to speed with a car racing at 100 miles per hour? A very dedicated one. Through the rest of 66 and into 67, and for decades to come, even within these recent years, over 100 experiences of the Mothman had been reported across the map, across the globe. And thankfully the internet exists because now the number has increased 100-fold, with Mothman experiences appearing almost weekly. What a busy man. With these seemingly endless reports, many questions come to our minds, with the most important ones being, where did the Mothman come from? And what did he want? You thought I was gonna say, where did he go? You thought, nah, he's not going nowhere.
Don't sit up all night thinking of ways to get rid of me. It makes wrinkles.
Once Point Pleasant Register released their headline about this man-sized bird creature something, America took it by storm, and in due time, the entire globe followed. But in Point Pleasant, it seemed the paranormal activity ramped up within such a short period of time. Reportings of lights in the sky, animals going temporarily feral, strange men in black coats looming the streets. It was either mass psychosis or the Mothman hype was real. But every tale of horror came to a halt on December 15th, 1967. 4:58 p.m., Point Pleasant Bridge, known as the Silver Bridge, would buckle during an afternoon commute in the midst of rush hour traffic, and a loud gunshot-like noise bellowed from the bridge. Within seconds, everything would collapse, and 46 people would lose their lives, with 2 bodies never being found. Speculations and theories poured out over the days, claiming the bridge was supporting too many vehicles. But that was ruled out as far from true, that the Silver Bridge wasn't even at half the max capacity during its peak collapse. The idea of old age or old materials were tossed out, but again, quickly disproven. But upon investigation, the suspect was identified: a single eye bar that had developed a fracture in one of the suspension chains. A report had concluded that the eye bar's corrosion was beyond unlikely in such a rural area, and that the location of the minute crack was inaccessible to visual inspection, and could not have been detected by any method without disassembly of the eye bar joint, a practical impossibility. A bizarre happenstance shortly after a statewide panic would, and surely did, result in fingers being pointed at, well, Mothman. Even to this day, Mothman is blamed for the Silver Bridge collapse, all because of the rumor that Mothman was spotted at the Silver Bridge the day prior to the collapse. And with this, Mothman's lore went from being a cryptic missing link to being a sign of the end times. If Mothman was spotted in an area, expect the worst. Mothman was blamed for the Chernobyl meltdown in 1986. Mothman was blamed for the Mexican swine flu outbreak in 2009. Mothman was blamed for the 1999 Russian apartment bombings and for the Fukushima meltdown in 2011. And even for a string of child disappearances in Salem, West Virginia. In 2007, another bridge would collapse, the I-35 Minnesota Bridge, injuring over 130 people. Mothman was, again, rumored to be spotted there as well. So, in other words, if something terrible happens, blame Mothman.
There he is, on the monkey bars.
Try to take him alive.
Oh no, not again! I'm telling you, I didn't do anything.
I don't care.
My glasses!
Despite the idea that once you see Mothman, doom is certain to come, there have been tales spread across the news and internet of people encountering our creature something, yet with no retaliation. But again, we must ask ourselves, where did Mothman come from?
Why are you here?
Well, it's a long story.
Quickly, the 2 most rational answers emerge. Well, Mothman came from space, an agent of the stars and the great beyond. Giant moth creature that's faster than a speeding car? Aliens. And the other answer being, obviously, Mothman's a demon who had escaped hell. The fallen angel Lucifer is sure to follow soon, as this is exactly what Lucifer had intended for, sending up a big old bug to give us the 2 spookies. Other theories were that Mothman is simply a figure of undiscovered species of animal, or that he was simply a ghost. a spirit. But the story in 1966 was the first the world has heard of Mothman. Right? Well, namesake perhaps, but the idea of a winged monster that manifests disasters is a description not too uncommon once you begin to look into mythology. The Banshee, an Irish folk monster, although not described as a moth but rather a fairy that floats in the air. Or the Hindu mythical creature Garuda, a half-eagle, half-man that precedes disaster. So, is Mothman of modern mythology a continuation of its fate-telling predecessors? Author Tara Burton and filmmaker Seth Breedlove theorize differently. Tara Burton wrote in their article, Desperately Seeking Mothman, that the idea of a single individual specimen completely dismounts logic far and wide when it comes to evolutional standards. Cryptids aren't just particular, they're also singular, Tara writes. Modern cryptids tend not to be members of an identified species, but rather, creatures that cannot reproduce or be reproduced. They problematize the very concept of species. The cryptid suggests that there is something inherent in existence that transcends nominal categories. If there is something out there that there is only one of, whose identity and hexiety are one, then the Enlightenment vision of universalism and its attendant metaphysics of the nominalized generic collapses inwardly. Seth Breedlove, however, writes on the idea that Mothman isn't exactly a creature, but rather a metaphor of humanity coping with the real world. History major Jonathan Gitter agrees as well. I've always said there's a correlation between when subjects like this become popular and the current state of the world. I've always felt that there's an escapism, as weird as that sounds. They definitely can directly tell us things about human beings and ourselves, and how we pass along stories. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the motivators for the spread and incubation of this myth is the small town. Everybody knows everybody, and hears something interesting. Eventually, following the collapse of the Silver Bridge, it became, here's meaning to why something bad happened. Then, it eventually became an economic draw for this small town. It's rather an interesting concept, imagining a fictional creature to distract our minds, or to place a cause onto negative events, a scapegoat even. Moth? And in 1966, people were beginning to learn exactly what we were doing over in Vietnam, along with what we were doing to ourselves. Aside from loose ties to other cultures, there doesn't seem to be a beginning time for Mothman. Perhaps there were spotty stories of an uncanny winged being that were murmured from time to time, but the world wasn't ready to listen until the 60s. And oh, how unready we truly were.
A very strange place, really. Old and musty. The kind of place you'd expect a ghost to like to wander around in.
The Mothman seems to frequently migrate northwest, his primary location being Chicago. And since our fuzzy fellow is capable of matching speeds of 100 miles per hour, I guess it's not impossible to think that he can just hightail it across the globe, going from Fukushima to Chicago in just a couple of months. Or there could be multiples. On August 22, 2011, a local resident took his wife to visit a childhood memorial that the resident had in mind, a giant Indian statue standing on top of a shop. Wanting to snag a photo for himself, the husband stepped out of his vehicle at 2 p.m. and took this photo. He would not see the figure in the sky until hours later when checking through his gallery. At first, I didn't think nothing of it. I figured it was a plane or something, but just for the heck of it, I enlarged it. It looked like something similar to a bird or a bat, but then again, it doesn't. So I have no idea what it could be, he writes. And then, just 5 weeks after the photo was taken, our fuzzy figure was spotted once more. These are the events as they happened on Friday, September 30th, 2011, approximately 1 block from the main campus of the University of Illinois at Chicago. Things began like any normal Friday night. I and a couple of friends were going to go out to have a few drinks at a local bar. As I got to my apartment, I jumped into the shower to start getting ready while my roommate went to her room to get ready. I finished and walked out of the bathroom to my room and started to get ready to head out for the night. As I started to get dressed, I heard my roommate scream loudly. I dropped what I was doing and I ran to her room to see if she was all right. She was babbling hysterically, saying that something was looking in at her from the window. I looked toward the window and didn't see anything but the light coming from the other apartments across the courtyard. I asked what she had seen and tried to tell her that she might have been mistaken, because we live on the 3rd floor of a 5-story apartment building, and there is nothing outside the window but a 30-foot drop straight down to the courtyard below. My roommate was hysterical and scared out of her wits. I took her to the living room and sat her on the couch. After about 20 minutes of calming her down, she finally told me what she had seen in her window. She stated that she was getting dressed, and when she turned to face the mirror on her dresser, she saw a pair of orange eyes staring at her from the window. She turned around to see 2 brightly lit orange eyes staring at her. These eyes were attached to a creature. My friend lost it and started screaming hysterically and backed herself into the corner. She said she was filled with this overwhelming feeling of complete and total terror. She felt like the creature was looking at her as though she was prey. She said she felt like a rabbit that was about to be pounced upon. I tried to rationalize with her what she had seen, telling her it could have been an optical illusion or maybe it was the jitters from a week of hard studying. She dismissed everything, saying that she had seen what she had seen. As I sat there comforting her, my cell phone rang from my room. I got up and ran to my room and snatched it from my dresser. It was my boyfriend and one of his buddies, and they were talking a mile a minute. It sounded like they were out of breath, and as I tried to get him to slow down, I walked past my roommate's open door, and to my absolute horror, I saw a pair of glowing red eyes looking through the window right at me. They stared at me for about 3 to 4 seconds before whatever it was abruptly left. And like my friend, I totally lost it, and I screamed at the top of my lungs and sprinted to the living room. My boyfriend was now screaming into the phone, asking what was wrong. Within 2 minutes, he and his best friend were pounding on the door to our apartment, followed shortly thereafter by one of our neighbors who had heard us screaming. Once we assured the neighbors that we were fine and they didn't have to call the CBD for us, we shut the door, and I immediately lost it when my boyfriend held me. We told him what my roommate had seen in the window, and that whatever it was had come back again, and that's when I had seen it. He then began to tell us that he and his buddy were on their way to our apartment to pick us up when they had seen what they describe as a large bat with large glowing eyes. It was perched on top of a basketball hoop in the neighborhood park. They stated that it saw them and had alighted into the air with an audible whoosh. He states that there were about 6 people in the park, and all of them had seen it when it had taken off. He states that there was no way anyone could have missed it. It was about 6 to 7 feet tall, dark gray to black, and those eyes glowed with the intensity of 2 glowing embers. He says that they saw it easily when it took off, and it headed away from the park due to both of the lights of the city as well as the nearly full moon that night. They lost sight of the creature after about 5 seconds, and that's when he picked up the phone and called me. He says that when they heard me start screaming, they sprinted the block and a half to the apartment. Needless to say, none of us went out that night, and my boyfriend and his buddy stayed with us through the weekend. My roommate refused to go back to her room till it was well after daylight. She closed and locked the window and drew the blinds shut. She says that it's the only way that she felt secure to be in there after dark. I'm still weary about coming home or going out after dark, even though I know I have to do it for both school and work. I hope that whatever it was sufficiently scared off by 2 insanely screaming college students, and that I hope that I never see it again. I don't think that neither I nor my roommate will ever be the same again after this. There is one interesting fact. My boyfriend told me when I saw him on Tuesday that A few students around the campus had been talking about a large bat that some people had seen on Friday night. A lot of the people who spoke about it were spooked by it. I never figured that anything like this would or could be seen in a city as large as Chicago, or a campus as busy and bustling as UIC. It makes me wonder what it truly was, and if it meant us any harm. And this is just one experience out of thousands to appear. In 2017, there were 55 reported sightings for our moth being just in Chicago alone. A common place for Mothman being the Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Maybe it's because of the lights.
Why on earth did you come here? And then the moth said, because the light was on.
But for over a decade, the airport would carry multiple reports of Chicago residents seeing a huge winged beast, 6 to 10 feet tall with a wingspan of over 10 feet, and large, glowing red eyes. Sounds like our friend returns once again. Yet, immediately, the story of the Mothman begins to fall apart, because if he's being spotted, especially so consistently, then where's all the tragedies? He's the harbinger of doom, yet the only tragedy that the O'Hare International Airport faced was the American Airlines Flight 191. But that was in 1979, and that was because of a plane's engine tearing off from its left wing. Mothman wasn't sighted at O'Hare until 2010. There's the theory that this could be a different Mothman, acknowledging the idea that there could be multiple. There could be Mothmen, even. But that just results in more unanswered questions, like how do they reproduce? How many are there? Do they breed? Are they lab experiments gone wrong? Are they asexual? The world begs for answers. And yet, our moth fella remains an enigma. The very limited experiences almost implies that he's choosing to be seen, and for all we know, that could be true. He's heard his nickname of being the Harbinger of Doom and decides he wants to be the Harbinger of Peace. Fuck it, who knows at this point? In 2019, a truck driver saw the creature at the airport while picking up cargo, and the fuzzy figure just stood there, never presenting harm. Again, in 2020, late September, a USPS worker at the airport reported seeing the man-creature something as she was leaving work one night. She believed it to be a tall person with a long coat until her car lights illuminated the figure. As I got closer to my car, I unlocked my car, which caused my headlights to come on. My headlights hit the person standing about 20 to 25 feet from my car, causing it to turn and look right at me. I saw that this was not some person, but some red-eyed creature, and what appeared to be a coat were actually wings, which it spread as it turned to look at me. This thing started making some type of chirping sound, almost a half chirp, half click, like someone was clicking their tongue, but much, much faster. It then made some type of screeching sound and took off running toward me. It got to within 10 feet of me and took off into the air and flew above me. The stories surrounding him began to shine him in a different light. When it all began, Mothman was an icon of terror. Point Pleasant citizens stormed the town streets with weapons, ready to take down this hypnotizing, dog-stealing threat. But since then, he's been, at most, a shy peeping Tom, gazing into windows and loitering in parking lots until discovered. But when encountered, he doesn't seem to put up a threat. He doesn't attack. He simply flees. Though some stories do describe him as presenting a threatening aura, that could just be the human psyche being unable to perceive, well, a half-man, half-moth who shares a height with Shaq. There are no biblical retellings of the Mothman, and according to anonymous users on the internet and the townsfolk of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the man, the myth, the moth is here to stay. And speaking of being here to stay, have you considered subscribing? Huh? That's me nudging your shoulder. Huh? I think that's neat. I think you subscribing would be a cool idea. I heard peer pressure is really cool. That's a new thing. You should subscribe. Thank you.